Good evening. Welcome to the Spiritual But Not Religious Show. I'm your host, George Lewis. I've got a really great guest tonight. Many of you will recognize him, and we've got a superb topic. But before I get into that, let me tell you a little bit about our parent company, Spiritual Broadcasting Network, and what the Spiritual Broadcasting Network is about and what we're trying to do with it. There are many, many diverse voices in the spiritual community, especially in the spiritual but not religious community. There are just huge numbers of people who don't go to church, who some do, some don't, but there's no real gathering point. There's no real voice for the people who claim to be spiritual but not religious. I just read an article today from the Austin, Texas newspaper down there. I believe it's a Statesman, talking about how many people are becoming spiritual but not religious. And so the idea is to provide a place so we can bring these people in. There's some very creative, wonderful teachers out there in this field, or not field, but in this space, and we want to bring those so that they come to the front more. There's just no real publicity in there. And so we just want you to know, if you're spiritual but not religious, you aren't alone. There are plenty of us, believe me. My guest tonight is Ken Seeley, and I tell you what, I really have. I've watched this man. I have a great deal of respect for him and what he does. He's an interventionist. What Ken does is he intervenes in people who are caught up in addictions of all kinds of addictions, from drugs and alcohol to food or lack of food, just anything that you can think of. And, you know, when you first think about why in the world on a spiritual but not religious program would you talk about drugs and alcohol and intervention? Who really cares, you know? Because what we see about drugs and alcohol is the horror stories and the things that are so damaging to our society and to our children. But what we don't see, because the media really doesn't bring us to us. They bring us that beginning, you know, before when the horror stories there. That's what we see, and we're not really privileged or privy to the inside of the recovery movement, which is really highly spiritual, and it has a place for believers of any kind of spirituality. But for the most part, not all, for the most part, recovery depends on the addict finding a power outside of themselves to help them out of the addiction. Because up until the point of an intervention or an addict hitting what's called their bottom, they're powerless, and that's a huge part of the addiction process. And so I'm sure that Ken and I are going to talk about the spiritual part of this program tonight. That's what's nearest and dearest to my heart. I've been in recovery for darn near 30 years, and it's been a wonderful journey. I've worked with many, many men and women who are addicts of every kind that you can think of, and Ken has a whole lot of experience. So I'm quite sure you'll enjoy the show tonight. If you're not an addict, or I suspect you probably know one. You have some addicts, some alcoholics, some has some effect on your life, some negative effect on your life. So you'll walk away tonight better informed, and certainly better informed how you might be able to help them stop more quickly before they destroy themselves and the people around them. Tom, we got Ken on the line?
Yes, we do, George.
Let me get him on. Good evening, Ken.
Hey, how are you?
Oh boy, we got a volume problem here, Ken. You're not coming through at all.
Can't hear me at all?
No. And that means our guests aren't going to be able to hear you.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I know. You know, I'll tell you what, we just for our audience sake, we checked all this out, and by phone, just phone, Ken sounds great. But by the time we go through our mixer and all the things that we do here, Ken, we're just not able to hear you at all. Have you got a phone handy that you're able to use, or are you on Skype?
I am on a telephone, actually.
Is there any way that you could, like, maybe even use a speakerphone or something and get it closer to you?
Put it on speakerphone?
Oh, there,
There you go.
that did it right
That sounds
there.
very good.
That's great. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's better.
One of the things that happens is you know your picture is in view now, but when this goes to archive, your picture won't go into archive. And one of the big problems that we've run across is by the time this gets to archive,
Yep.
your audio just kind of like dies. So, but I can hear you pretty well. Tom, how is it over there for you?
Sounds good so far.
We all right? Maybe you can give Dan a call and have him tell
I
us.
will.
Will you
I
do
will
that?
do that.
Okay. Because this is going to be I'm really pleased to have you on the show, Ken. I have a great deal of respect for you. I've watched you. I see what you do, and it's a marvelous service. The more that we can get this in front of the public's eye, the better shot we've got at beginning to change some of this huge problem that we have in this country.
Yeah, I agree.
And you know what? We want to talk about stopping drugs and alcohol at the border, or drugs at the border. But the truth is, we got to stop the demand somehow or other.
There you go. You're speaking my language.
Absolutely, absolutely. Because when it comes to getting our drug, whatever that might be to you, we're darn good at doing that, aren't we?
Oh yeah.
Listen, your business is intervention. You've been doing it for 12 years. That's a long time. I'm sure you've got a ton of stories. But before we get into that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about you a bit. I'd like our audience to know who you are and how you got here, because that is so vital to the work that you do. As I understand it, you had a problem with methamphetamines. Am I right?
Yes, crystal meth. That was my drug of choice.
Crystal meth. Can you give us a little background? Tell us your story, if you would, on a brief version of your story. How what it was like, what happened, and what it's like for you now.
Yeah, it was July. It'll be 21 years that my work sat me down and intervened on me. I moved far away from my family, and so they didn't know how bad I really was in my addiction.
Right.
But my work that seen me every day, they knew that there was a problem. So they said, you need to change, and if you choose to get help, maybe your job will be here, maybe it won't. And I checked into treatment. So they sat me down and did an intervention on me.
Well, what was going on in your life though, other than that? How was it just outside of your work? I mean, what was going on for you? I mean, was that part of your life falling apart, or was it just having an effect on your work?
Well, I had a lot of friends and a lot of different people that said that I needed to get help, and I would take it to the limit. And my job was paying my bills, my expenses, my rent, my car payment, and I needed to keep my addiction alive financially. So I started selling crystal meth at clubs, so I could afford to keep the addiction alive. And I did that for about 2-3 years, and it just, on the outside, I would have told you everything was okay, but deep down inside, I was just miserable.
Right.
Just miserable.
Well, especially with crystal meth, it's one thing to be drinking a bottle of wine. That's a lot cheaper than crystal meth or whatever the drug is. But my experience is you either start dealing or you start stealing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You either have to do one or the other, or you cannot keep that addiction alive.
Right. So, so your work was the interventionist at that point. Is that right?
Yeah, actually, the guy that conducted my intervention, he was teaching interventions at a local college.
Oh, really?
So he was an addiction specialist, and he, was teaching it, and he worked with my employer, and intervened on me. Of course, now today we're much more advanced in medicine and intervention, so we're able to, really help hit that rock bottom at many different levels, and not only bring the work in, but bring the complete environment of the addict and get everybody involved.
Right. So did you go to a rehab at that point, or did you get into some kind of other recovery program?